Hi, good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining me as I give somewhat of an update about this very sensitive topic. It's sensitive because so many people consider it a conspiracy, these embalmers clots. One thing I've learned so far in the pandemic is to actually reflect carefully on everything that is said. I don't assume anything these days. I just try and see if I can get a scientific understanding of what people are observing. The critical thing is to learn to observe. That's really what we have to do in science. And it's important what embalmers have been talking about. And who we have to give credit to is Tom Haviland because of the incredible work that he has been doing. He's a retired US major and he was in data analysis. And when he watched a program called Died Suddenly, he thought this should be investigated properly. And he tried to reach out to embalmers across the world to see what it was that they were finding. I've interviewed him a few times, and the data seems about correct. Quite a number are seeing abnormal patterns, different from what they would normally see when they're trying to get blood out of the corpse in order to put embalming fluid. They're seeing very strange, stringy, fibrous, elastic clots. That's a scientific observation. As to what it means, you can't quite judge, and it's easy to jump to conclusions. So part of the scientific exercise that I tried to do is to question what could it be? What could be the mechanism? So I spoke with researchers about amyloid fibrin clots. Could they be aggregating? What would be the mechanism? Why would it happen in only some people? What are the criteria? How do we identify if it is occurring? Is it significant? Is it responsive to normal anticoagulation? These are all clinical questions. But the first problem is if it's not acknowledged, it's not relevant. So getting back to where we are now, if you are planning to take a look at what that interview I had, it's a very, very important interview. You can click on the link below in Substack, and it's just right there about are embalmers clots occurring in the living. Really interesting interview. I had Dr. Shankara with me. I had the whistleblower from the US who really took a risk coming forward. He showed images. I've put all the images there. So don't go there if you're squeamish because you'll be seeing clots. So it's not for people who are squeamish. But for those people who are questioning and who think, come on, this is just ridiculous, you need to listen and watch that video, especially if you're clinical. You have to look at it and then reflect carefully on what he was saying. You'll realize that what he's saying is accurate. And when you look at the pictures, you'll realize that they could not have been made up. So even if you're questioning if it's real, I think that from a clinical point of view, those people who have seen it have recognized that this is something quite significant. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be playing a clip from Grant Stinchfield, and I'm also going to be trying to give a little bit more science around what I've been thinking over the past few months. And so you have here, this is the interview that Tom Haviland had with Grant Stinchfield. And as usual, this was highlighted. I'm trying to say, okay, this is what was said, but we do need to get further clarification on that. And so I'll be playing some clips of that with Thomas Haviland, and then I'll be trying to explain some of my more recent thoughts about what could be the mechanism that this is occurring, because it is very, very strange. And so let's start off and listen to the first bit of the interview. The interview is about 9 minutes long. I don't know if I'll play all of it. I'll break it up into little bits, and in there add some thoughts as well for your attention. So let me just get this this ready, and let's listen to what he has to say.
Back, everyone. All right, if you're sitting down for dinner, I'm going to apologize for this segment, but I want you to take a look at this. These are basically what we would call white fibrous clots that are being pulled out of people. Now, we have seen these pulled out of people that have passed. Embalmers are finding these at a record numbers. We were some of the first to tell you about this story of embalmers finding these clots, we believe related to COVID and the vaccine. Now we're learning that these clots are now being found in living people. Those people at a cath lab that put catheters into people are finding these clots also in living people. What is happening here? Well, joining us now to discuss this is the gentleman we first had on the program. He is a data analyst and former United States Air Force major. He's been studying the issue of these clots post-COVID. Tom Haviland is back with us. Major, great to have you back on the show.
Grant, thanks for having me on the show to talk about this very important topic. And you told me to come back on the show if I had any new information. The last time I talked to your audience a couple of months ago, I was reporting the results of my latest worldwide embalmer blood clot survey, of which out of 269 embalmers that responded to that survey, 197 of them, 73% said they were still seeing the white fibrous clots, like I'm showing the audience here. They're kind of whitish or tannish color. They were finding those in about 20% of their corpses on average. So it was, it's an alarming thing, right? But now, as you said, we have proof through a couple of cath lab whistleblowers that have started to come forward that now these white fibrous clots are admitting that they've been seeing them in the living for the last 3 years as well.
All right, so this...
I'm going to pause that here for just a moment, and I'm going to think carefully about what it is that he has been saying with regards to some of these fibrous clots. Now, as I said, for those people who don't believe it's possible, you're not being scientific. First, if it's being observed and 73% who responded are seeing it, you've got to think this has got to be significant. So before I go any further with that interview, I just wanted to share a few of the ideas that I've had about what really could be the mechanism behind this. And so I'm going to share with you a few slides, and this is from the whistleblower image from the whistleblower as well. I did have the privilege of speaking to the whistleblower first, the first person who was willing to share this. I spoke with them. So it was a very important discussion, and he took great risk in talking about it. So let's just look at a little bit of the science around it. I've got here an image of the vascular system of the body. And in it here, you can see this is the heart here, and it's pumping blood around the body. And it's also receiving blood from different parts of the body, from the head and the neck and the arms, as well as coming up from the legs and the abdomen. Red are arteries and blue are veins. Veins bring blood back to the heart, top and bottom. Arteries pump blood, oxygenated blood around the body in red, okay? So usually the path of an artery always usually follows a similar path with the vein. They usually run alongside each other. And so right here in blue, just about here, this is the inferior vena cava, and it's carrying deoxygenated blood back to the heart, where it's going to go through the lungs to get oxygen again. So this circle continues to happen. Now, the reason I'm highlighting especially the vena cava is because a number of the clots, if you had looked at the full video and the images that I have in the link, a number of the clots are occurring in this inferior vena cava. And part of my question is why? Why is it occurring here and also in some of the arterial system? So I then took a look at this is an image of a muscular artery. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because I want you to understand that whatever is causing the body to lay down abnormal proteins on the lining of the blood vessel wall has got to be something that is occurring quite systemically. So why is it presenting in big veins, not necessarily small ones? And it seems to happen as well in big arteries. So here is an artery, and inside, this is the lining, the internal lining. It's usually very smooth because any kind of chink will cause blood to clot. And this is why the body protects the smoothness of the inside of the artery. But the bits that I want to focus on are the arteries and veins on the outside. And we call them the vasa vasorum, okay? And they supply nutrition to all the muscles and the layers of the artery all the way around. And there is also supply from the inside, but that's usually not as deep. Most of the supply comes from these here. Now, I recently did a presentation about the fact that there was dissection in some of these big arteries, aortic dissection, and it was because of inflammation in these blood vessels around the big artery. Again, the reason why I've highlighted that is because these vasa vasorum are also in the big veins. Okay, so like the inferior vena cava, because I was trying to understand what mechanism is causing this deposition of abnormal proteins. And this is it more closely. You can see here that if you had inflammation, even in a big vein on the outside, which then caused inflammation on the lining of the blood vessel, you would start to immediately lay down clot, because this is just what the body does. This area is supposed to be very smooth, and any kind of inflammation tends to trigger the body to start trying to heal it with the formation of clots. And so that's a very important piece of the puzzle. And so when I show you this picture here again, and again I show you these are the veins going up in blue, right? This is what it looks like in real time. And this is what the whistleblower was finding. So this is where they're doing an embolectomy. So this represents the veins here, the two big veins coming together to the inferior vena cava. This represents a wire that's going to try and pull all of these clots out. When you go to the Substack, you will see exactly what it looked like when all the clots were pulled out, and you can see that they fit almost all of these big veins. So my suspicion is that there is inflammation in the lining of these veins, which is then predisposing to the deposition of abnormal proteins and clots. And this is probably one of the mechanisms why we're seeing this, not just in the Embalmers clots, but also in the living. So some pretty serious stuff. So it may seem light, but it's serious because it has clinical implications. And so when people say they don't believe it, that doesn't make sense. You need to examine what was seen or what is being seen. And critically, in the interview, it's going to be highlighted that Tom Haviland has identified other whistleblowers. So it's not just one. It's just that people are absolutely afraid to come forward. That's very, very worrying. And that's probably the most serious thing that we now have to address. So let's get back to some of the interview here, and you can listen to what else was said.
This is what you tipped me off to, and as I said, I'm hungry for information, and you told it to me. So this gentleman who didn't want his identity known was on another podcast. We have the audio of him. This is a whistleblower saying that he is seeing that it seems like the vaccines have a greater issue on these clots now, that 99% of his patients that see these clots are COVID vaccinated. So roll the clip from the whistleblower.
It seems like the more vaccines that they have, the bigger the problem is. We've had patients now that have up to 8 vaccines. 8. But we also have patients with 1. Well, I could only speak to my lab. And in my lab, it's 99% vaccinated.
All right, this is helpful, Major, because one of the questions I asked you was, how do we determine whether these clots are from the COVID virus or the COVID vaccine or a combination of all three? We know that they started appearing after COVID burst on the scene, but we don't exactly know. Now with this in living patients, more clots in people that have been more vaccinated. Am I getting this right, Major?
Yeah, and we knew the embalmers were suspecting the clots were forming pre-death because they were picking up bodies that were only an hour or two old, Grant, and they were finding them riddled with the clots. And they said there's no way that these clots could be forming in just the hour or two since the person passed. There was also one of the embalmers from the Died Suddenly film who runs a funeral home in Missouri. She's also a funeral director and does her own embalming. And she said every time she found the white fibrous clots, she would ask the families of the deceased, was your loved one COVID vaccinated? And she said 100% of the time, Grant, without fail, the answer was yes, the person had been vaccinated. So now that's being corroborated by this gentleman that came forward and said he's seen the white fibrous clots, and 99% of the time he sees it is the people have had anywhere from 1 to 8 COVID vaccines.
Amazing. So let me play one more clip from that whistleblower's interview. Roll that.
We seem to be only treating the white fibrous clots now. The white fibrous clots is the majority, and we are now seeing about anywhere from 3 to 10 a week.
So what you're saying is that in the cohort of patients who have white fibrous clots, 99% are vaccinated?
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's getting back to exactly what you were saying, Major Haviland. So now I get to the point of you have this study, you have the whistleblowers, we have all of the other studies. There's been plenty of other studies that are calling into question these vaccines. We could go through all, but it would take literally days, if not weeks, to do. Is anyone listening to you? Is anyone from the CDC or the NIH or the FDA? Have you taken this to anybody, and are they listening?
Crickets so far, Grant, and it's unfortunate. And by the way, I have found my own cath lab whistleblower here in the United States as well. This particular gentleman that you showed the video clip of, he's from the U.S. as well. And by the way, the one that you just saw in the clip, he has over 20 years of experience as what's called an endovascular specialist. He's the guy that actually physically removes the clots from the people in the cath lab, which is also staffed with vascular surgeons, cardiologists, radiologists, anesthesiologists, and nurses. So there's other people that are witnessing this as well, but they're all afraid to come out, Grant, because they see what's happening to doctors. They're getting their licenses pulled, their board certifications taken away. So there's a big fear from both this gentleman, the audience just saw, plus the other whistleblower that I'm working with right now, trying to get them to come forward to talk about this. And unfortunately, the FDA and the CDC don't want to look into either the embalmers or what's happening in these. There's 1,700 cath labs across the United States, and I'm sure this is happening in many of these. And by the way, that gentleman said, he's pulling anywhere from 3 to 10 clots out of patients every week.
So this is serious stuff, and as I was saying, this is being corroborated across the world. So it's not one person, but what he highlighted there, which is probably the most serious point, is that people are afraid. So even me talking about this comes with the risk. Will this video even stay up? Because it actually dared to think about whether or not there was potentially a correlation. Now, this is really worrying, because if this is how we're practicing medicine and science now, there's very little chance that if there are serious issues that need to be addressed, we're not going to find them. Or if you find them, it will be too late. That's the seriousness of what we're facing at the moment. And as I said, based on autoimmunity and the research I've done around autoimmunity, the fact that the virus is still circulating, I believe the combination, when you put the things together, and virus can break through mucosal immunity, where there is previous spike-induced priming, you can have an absolutely disastrous combination. And I think this is the thing nobody had anticipated. The problem is that not if it seems that this is definitely occurring, we need to know what exactly are the proteins in them, whether or not they're just amyloid, or combinations of other things. We need to understand the mechanisms, which blood vessels are affected. We need to understand how these things respond to anticoagulation. Will they respond to just straightforward anticoagulation? Will it need anticoagulation with antiplatelets with higher risk of clotting? Will we have to go back to old style treatments with warfarin instead of the newer DOACs? There's so many questions that are clinically relevant that by not addressing these issues puts not only patients, it puts the whole medical industry at risk. And it's coming to a point where, yes, we do need people who are willing to just do the science, ask the hard questions, try and come up with answers because they need to be done. So, as I said, if you are interested and can handle looking at clots, take a look at the link below to watch the full video. I recommend it certainly to anyone who is clinical. Please look at it. Happy for you to criticize what he has said, what you disagree with. Engage in the conversation. That's what science is about. Let's make sure that we've done everything in our power to protect the patients who we're advocating for. Have a great evening.